Going into the top 5 players of the 2025 preseason, there's a pretty solid mix that I have here, but the first one that I want to actually get into is second-year running back out of Boise State, George Holani. So George Holani, first off, had 12 carries for 110 yards and a touchdown. Now, that's averaging 9 yards a carry. And if you're doing that over 10 carries, that's not easy to do. Even in the preseason, that's not easy to do, right? George Holani has always had to fight for a spot on an NFL team, right? He is in his second year. He went undrafted. I think a lot of the reason why he went undrafted is he had to share the backfield with Ashton Jeanty at Boise State. I was looking at George Holani's stats while he was at Boise State, and his best performance was his junior year, which isn't necessarily normal, right? When you normally see someone playing in the NFL, you see, I would say, an upward trajectory throughout his entire college career. But unfortunately for him, he had to sit behind, or he had to share the backfield, I should say, with Ashton Jeanty at Boise State. And so that's not easy. His junior year, I should say, he had 221 carries for a little bit over 1,100 yards, and he had 10 touchdowns. And then his senior year, he had 134 carries, right? So he almost lost 100 carries total, a little bit less than 100 carries. He had 748 yards and 7 touchdowns. So he had 3 less touchdowns on a lot less carries. So that, to me, is production. That's showing upward trajectory. But the problem is he was sharing the backfield with Ashton Jeanty, who was the first running back taken in this NFL draft, right? That's not easy to do. That's not an easy circumstance to be in if you're George Holani. And, being with the Seahawks, they have opportunities for him to be able to play, right? I think, you have Walker, right, as their starting running back. Kenny Walker, he's a great running back. He's a big-bodied running back. But to me, when I see George Holani, he makes the first guy miss almost every single time, right? I think that's a huge aspect of being successful in the NFL is you're not going to be the most athletic. You're not going to be the biggest anymore. And to me, making the first guy miss is a crucial aspect of being a successful running back in the NFL because you always need to be getting positive yards. You can never stay behind the chains in the NFL if you want to keep your job. And to me, he has good feet, he has great vision, and he has really good change of direction. There's a lot of times, the play might be set up to go into one gap, and he's bouncing it out to the outside, or maybe he's going from the outside and bouncing it back in to make some pretty big plays. He didn't necessarily have any home run plays in the preseason. His longest run was for 20 yards, again, which makes that 9 yards a carry even more impressive, right? There wasn't some outlier where he ran for 50, 60 yards for a touchdown to make his average go up, but he's just consistent. And so for me, George Holani, I think he deserves a roster spot. I hope that the Seahawks keep him there because I think he could be a really good backup running back for the Seahawks for years to come. The second top performer I have in this NFL preseason, I've actually talked about him before already on this show in a different episode, but I was really impressed with Stetson Bennett. Stetson Bennett, first off, I don't think people remember, he took a year off essentially after the preseason, his rookie year, to handle some mental health issues. I think he was having some issues with drinking, and it really was impacting Stetson Bennett. But if you remember Stetson Bennett in college, he is a national champion, right? He led the Georgia Bulldogs to a national championship. He was a very loved guy there, right? He had a very impressive senior season. He threw over 4,000 yards, had 27 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions, right? Those are big-time numbers. Now, when it comes to the NFL, he hasn't put up a single stat in a regular NFL season game. That alone is a reason why you need to be proving yourself in the preseason on a regular basis. He's sitting behind Matt Stafford as well as Jimmy Garoppolo. I myself am not a Jimmy Garoppolo believer. I think he's really still in the NFL because he showed flashes like 4 or 5 years ago. That is Jimmy Garoppolo to me. He's a guy that showed flashes 4 or 5 years ago and hasn't done anything since. The last time I remember seeing Jimmy Garoppolo in anything of importance was in the Netflix show Wide Receiver, where Devontae Adams is talking about how he's going to get killed out there because Jimmy Garoppolo was just leaving him out to dry. Now, Stetson Bennett, again, he has had a very impressive preseason, 512 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions, including some exciting like game-winning drives where he's actually played a majority of the preseason. They really kept Jimmy Garoppolo out for a lot of the preseason, and then Matt Stafford's been dealing with his back issue really the whole entire preseason. He's back at practice, and again, I've talked about this before, but I don't necessarily see Matt Stafford being able to play a full season with a nagging back injury. I think he's going to be out there week 1. But again, what happens when Nick Bosa hits him in the back, right? You're going to put Jimmy Garoppolo out there? Again, I've already mentioned Devontae Adams definitely is not a fan of Jimmy Garoppolo. And again, Stetson Bennett has proven to me, at least in this preseason, that he has the ability to play in the NFL. The biggest, I'd say, issue that Stetson Bennett has is his size. But again, when you throw for 512 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions, to me, that's a really crucial performance in the preseason. He won them some preseason games, like I said. So again, I do consider him one of the top performers in the 2025 NFL preseason. Next player I want to talk about, and this is another quarterback, another non-rookie quarterback as well, Tyson Bagent, right? Quarterback for the Chicago Bears, right? He's the backup to Caleb Williams. First off, congratulations to Tyson Bagent for securing a contract, right? This is a guy that went undrafted out of Shepherd College, right? Most people don't even know where Shepherd College is. I can tell you it's in Pennsylvania. The only reason why I know that is I know someone that went there, but I don't know them for football whatsoever. But Tyson Bagent obviously has always had the world going against him when it comes to opportunities to get into the NFL and to play. And he made a name for himself. 2 years ago, he played in 5 games. He had a 65% completion percentage, almost threw for 900 yards. He did have 3 touchdowns and 6 interceptions, right? So the 6 interceptions is not what you want to see. But again, focusing on this preseason, again, he signed a 2-year deal worth $10 million. So that's $5 million a year to a guy that went to Shepherd College, right? I don't think anyone expected that, but I'm so happy for him. I'm so proud for him. And he also backed that up in this preseason, and I think this is why he earned this contract. He threw for 511 yards. He had 5 touchdowns and 1 interception. So that alone shows huge progression, right, in his game. It shows that he can be a manager of a game if he has to, and it shows he also can win some games. He had a game-winning drive as well for the Chicago Bears. And so for me, again, the preseason isn't about the starters generally anymore. It's about depth. It's about finding people that will save your team in a pinch, right? If something happens to Caleb Williams, how will the Bears do without him? And I think with Tyson back there at quarterback, you have to feel a lot better about that as a Bears fan and as a Bears organization. So again, well-deserved contract by Tyson Bagent. Very happy for him. Another player that I want to talk about, and this is actually on the defensive side, and this is someone that is also a undrafted rookie free agent, and he's actually out of Rutgers. But this is Eric Rodgers, the cornerback for the Chargers. Eric Rodgers has been nothing but impressive this entire preseason. He's still listed at the complete bottom of the depth chart for the Los Angeles Chargers. There are 7 or 8 cornerbacks that are listed ahead of Eric Rodgers on that depth chart. They still haven't necessarily mentioned whether or not he's made this team. We're still waiting to hear about that. But if I'm a Chargers fan, if I'm in the Charger organization, I want Eric Rodgers on my team. He's a longer cornerback. He's listed at 6'2", 190. Not a lot of people know about him because I think he transferred out of Northern Illinois and played his last season at Rutgers, who obviously still isn't a powerhouse, and he didn't necessarily test that well either at the combine, right? He ran in the high 4.5s from a 40 perspective, which I think really hurt him. Like, if you don't have the game tape, if you don't invest in watching a player like Eric Rodgers from a scouting perspective, you're going to miss a lot of the intangibles and key aspects of a player when it comes to being able to be an NFL caliber cornerback. A big aspect that people talk about is game speed. There are people that can run a race and they can sprint and they can sprint fast, and that's exciting, right? A lot of people get excited mostly about 40 times when it comes to the NFL Combine. A lot of times teams don't necessarily pay attention as much to that because they like to look at tape. A big aspect of this is game speed. Game speed is a huge aspect of this. And to me, he had 4 passes defense, right? So he essentially stopped 4 completions from happening in the game. He had 1 forced fumble, and he also had 2 interceptions in the preseason. And again, you have to remember this. You're talking about not like a full game. He had 2 interceptions in 3 games. I think if you were probably to put together all 3 of those games, it would probably equate to 1 full game of performance for Eric Rodgers, right? So imagine him doing this if he played all defensive snaps as a cornerback in a normal NFL regular season game. That's probably what it equated to with the amount of plays and the amount of snaps he got in the preseason. Because again, they're also trying out other people. It's not like they're sitting there saying, "Hey, let's see what Eric Rodgers can do. Let's put him out there for this whole game." He's trying to make this team along with the other cornerbacks, and he was the last player on this depth chart. So they had to check out and look at other players ahead of them to see like, hey, are they performing? You have to think about that when you think about these stats, right? 4 passes defense, that's not something that you're going to look up and say like, oh my god, that's amazing in a 3-game span. But when you think about the amount of snaps he probably got in those 3 games, again, Eric Rodgers to me is someone that I think should make this LA Chargers team. I really hope he does. If he doesn't, I hope another team picks him up because to me, he's proven himself as an NFL caliber cornerback. The last guy I want to talk about from most impressive preseason performances is Austin Booker, edge rusher for the Chicago Bears. So Austin Booker, he was drafted 5th round out of Kansas in 2024, and he's a pretty big-bodied edge, right? He's 6'6", 245 pounds, so that's a pretty daunting person. That's a pretty intimidating body. But he led the NFL this preseason with 4 sacks, and he also had 1 forced fumble. I talked about this with Eric Rodgers. Like, he isn't playing a full game when this happens, right? Austin Booker isn't out there for every defensive snap in these 3 games. They're also looking at other players. And so having 4 sacks in 3 games is crazy. They have edge rushers like Montez Sweat out there, and they also have Deo Adebayo, and I probably messed that name up. I apologize. But Austin Booker showed that he deserves to be out there. He deserves to have snaps in this regular season. Because again, if you look at the amount of snaps he had, to have 4 sacks in that is extremely impressive. And again, I had to put him in my top 5 when it comes to overall preseason performances.